move to strike the last word. Madam Chair, what we have here today is the same story, but a different chapter. The bill before us is another instance of the majority's desire to weaponize financial regulation to name and shame companies and to advance partisan social goals through back channels. Last week, the Democrats nearly lost a vote on the floor on a bill that would require public companies to disclose non-material information. 4 of their own members recognized that the bill wouldn't do anything to help retail investors and that financial regulation is not the appropriate avenue to address all of the challenges that we face in society. This bill is similar to the legislation we voted on last week, but I would argue even more problematic. The data required in the bill are largely already publicly available through SEC filings, regulatory reports, and other publications by the banks. Redundant reporting in this bill once again underscores that the largest banks in this country and their agreement to redefine a corporate purpose to elevate stakeholders ahead of shareholders was a terrible mistake. It did not appease the far left in this country. What it did was it invited more legislation like this that would further politicize America's largest financial institutions. It would commandeer the biggest banks in the country to advance a political and social agenda as opposed to doing what banks should do, which is take deposits, make loans, provide access to capital, and make this country a growing, job-producing, competitive enterprise. Banks should act like banks. Banks should not be an arm of a political party. But that's what this bill seems to want to do, is to transform America's biggest banks in the banking sector into part of the Democratic National Committee. Unfortunately, my colleagues still operate under the misguided assumption that additional disclosures will somehow solve a specific underlying problem. And this is where I really think we ought to drill down on the legislation. We all recognize that cybersecurity is a significant challenge facing the financial sector. The GSIB CEOs during their appearance in this committee said so last month. But this bill would require the GSIBs to disclose their approach to cybersecurity and protecting data. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon estimated that his firm spends upwards of $600 million per year on cybersecurity. I wonder how they would articulate their allocation of that $600 million in the report conceived under Ms. Presley's bill. Whether that report would deliver new and meaningful information that would justify the resources required to publish it. And most importantly, would the report do anything to actually combat cyber threats? With that, I'd like to ask the sponsor of this legislation if she would indulge me on just a few simple clarifying questions on that. Would Ms. Presley yield to a question? Thank you. And the question is, how do the cybersecurity disclosures required by this bill strengthen cybersecurity? I yield.
As I stated earlier, I do believe that which gets measured gets done, and currently what's being reported is voluntary and arbitrary. It would be better to have all of these things in one place, and I do think that ultimately it will allow for a more robust reporting to ensure that consumers are in fact being protected.
That's a fair point, and I'll reclaim my time. It's a fair answer to the question. I guess let me drill down a little bit further. The bill requires a GSIB to publicly disclose its approach to cybersecurity and protecting consumer data. A further question would be to the author of the legislation. How do we draw the line for what should be reported about a bank's cybersecurity efforts and what may remain proprietary for the sake of operational security? Or put another way, are you concerned that cyber criminals could use the public reports about a bank's cybersecurity efforts as an actual roadmap to understand their defenses and launch a more targeted attack? And I yield to the author for her response to that question.
Well, I'm under the impression that these GSIBs should be able to promulgate the difference there, and again, certainly would not want to put consumers at greater risk here. That information should be public, and we should have privacy safeguards.
Well, thanks for the answer again. But I think just in my remaining time, this is the problem I have with the bill. The number one problem I have with the bill is that these disclosures may not add anything, but in fact they could be harmful to the institution's efforts to defend themselves against what they say is their number one threat, which is cybersecurity. So I appreciate the well-meaning effort of the author of the bill. I oppose the bill for these concerns, and I yield back.